the Christian army was utterly destroyed in the Battle of Atin on July 4th, 1187. Saladin, the champion of Islam, moved to reduce the remaining Christian holdings in the Holy Land. In mere months, Acre, Haifa, Caesarea, Jaffa, Sidon were in Muslim hands. In Jerusalem, Balian of Ibelin held out under siege until October, when he surrendered the city. Christians native to the city were permitted to stay, while the rest were escorted out, a testament to Saladin's peaceful takeover. But the well-fortified port of Tyre remained in Christian hands. Aboard a Genoese ship, a certain Frankish noble from northern Italy, Conrad of Montferrat, was just days from reaching Tyre. Successes against the armies of Frederick, Barbarossa brought him fame and prestige, while his personality and good looks made him the darling of the court in Constantinople. Now, with most of the Holy Land lost and much of the Crusader leadership dead or captured, by pure chance Conrad emerged as the principal Christian leader in the Levant upon his arrival in Tyre in mid-July 1187. Across the Mediterranean Sea, word of the disastrous turn of events reached Pope Urban III, who allegedly died from shock upon hearing the news. 9 days later, on October 29th, 1187, his successor, Pope Gregory VIII, issued the papal bull Audita Tremendi, which pushed for a renewed crusade to retake Jerusalem. Despite the disastrous Second Crusade of the 1140s, the interest in the Levant region and in maintaining the Crusader states remained stout and on the minds of many European rulers. Prince Richard, the future Lionheart, took the cross prematurely before the papal bull had even been issued. His father, King Henry II of England, and King Philip II of France committed themselves to a new crusade on the urging of Jocelyn, Archbishop of Tyre, who had traveled to Europe from the Holy Land to ensure the two kings set their differences aside and help the relief in the East. Philip Dalsus, Count of Flanders, joined the enterprise soon after. The three men agreed with Henry's proposal to introduce a massive levy for the crusade, dubbed the Saladin Tithe. By July 6, 1189, however, King Henry II died, leaving his son, newly crowned King Richard I, to take up the responsibility of leading the English contingent in the Third Crusade. In Mainz, the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa also took the cross and committed the German people to the new crusade. Meanwhile, in the Levant, Saladin released Guy of Lusignan from captivity in the summer of 1188. As per the terms of his release, Guy agreed not to take up arms against Saladin again, an oath he was quick to betray. He took his family and loyal followers up to Tripoli, where Balian of Ibelin had taken the Christian refugees from Jerusalem. Back in Tyre, Conrad of Montferrat heavily fortified the ancient city and successfully held out against a 7-month siege by Saladin's army. The Sultan, meanwhile, launched a campaign into Syria, capturing city after city and fortress after fortress. Now, in the summer of 1189, Guy collected the troops from both Tripoli and Antioch and led his new army south to Tyre. As the ruler of the kingdom of Jerusalem, which Tyre was a part of, Guy had expected to take up residence in the city, but Conrad refused him entry. A fierce rivalry soon developed between the two men. Stuck outside Tyre until August 1189, Guy decided he could wait no longer. He turned his army and marched on Acre to attempt to recapture the city and set up his base of operations there. With up to 700 knights and 9,000 levy infantry, Guy advanced along the Scandalian Pass, a coastal road that kept away from the interior, where the lurking Saracen scouts kept a watchful eye. But the movements of the Crusaders were spotted, after all, and the information relayed to Saladin. Strangely, the Sultan hesitated. Encamped at Belfort Castle, a strong defensible spot, he wondered if Guy's movement was an elaborate ruse intended to lure him away from this good position and render him vulnerable to attack from the north and south. The Crusaders eventually reached Acre. Over the coming days, they were joined by other contingents coming down the pass, as well as a Pisan force which chose to sail instead of march. Guy and his main host encamped on the ancient hill known as the Torin, climbing it by night to avoid detection. From the Torin, they had a clear view of the city and the Acre plain below. The position was highly defensible. The eastern edge of the Torin dropped steeply, making Guy's encampment immune from cavalry charges. Between the Torin and the city walls, Guy's main army encamped on August 28, 1189, marking the start of the siege of Acre. Upon learning of the siege, Saladin set out from Belfort Castle with his army, calling for additional soldiers throughout his empire to reinforce him. Men from Mosul, Sinjar, Diyarbakir, and elsewhere soon flocked to the Sultan's banner. From his vantage point on the Torin, Guy watched as Muslim reinforcements gradually came into view, and the Christian warriors prayed to God to succor them. Saladin made his camp on August 30th at Tel Kaysan, close to Acre. The Muslim left wing spread across the Belis River, with the right wing stretching to Tel al-Aidiyah. In front of the main ranks was a stationary advance guard, whose orders would harass the Crusader perimeter on a daily basis and prevent anyone from escaping the encirclement. Guy's army was now trapped between the defenders of Acre and Saladin's relief army. On September 1st, Guy launched an attack on the walls of Acre before the bulk of Saladin's army could arrive. Because his siege catapults were not yet complete, Guy relied on his infantry to carry the assault. They rushed forward with ladders to scale the city walls. From above, the defenders shot arrows, hurled rocks and other projectiles. The Christians pushed their way up, and a fierce melee broke out along the ramparts. The attack, however, was soon aborted after messengers brought news of Saladin's approaching main army. Fortunately for Guy, reinforcements were on their way, and not just from Tyre. In mid-September, a fleet from the west carrying Danes, Welsh, and Cornish arrived. A day later, a second fleet, led by the Lord of Condé and Guise, James of Avanes, was approaching. 50 ships strong, it carried between 12,000, 14,000 Flemings, Frisians, Germans, and Bretons. James took control of the Crusader armies, field operations after his arrival, sometimes sharing the responsibility with Ludwig III, Landgrave of Thuringia. Near the end of the month, more reinforcements arrived from Tyre, led by Conrad and Gerardo, Bishop of Ravenna. So many Christian ships were now moored in the bay and blockading Acre's harbor that their mass reminded one Muslim observer of tangled thickets. The Muslim leadership estimated the Crusader force to be 2,000 horse and 30,000 foot. Saladin met with his war council and decided it was time to test the strength of the Christians. On the morning of September 14th, the Sultan launched an attack on the Christian lines. He hoped to punch a hole through the siege works and drive on towards Acre, but the Crusaders stood firm and held back the Muslim tide. Saladin's cavalry, however, spotted a weakness in the enemy line north of the city and reinforced. The attack there, after an hour of desperate fighting, the Christians were driven back. However, they soon reformed their battered lines, formed a shield wall mixed with crossbows, and mounted lances, and regained the lost ground. 2 days into the fight, Saladin was unable to break the Crusaders' siege lines, so he opted to extend his own lines to besiege. The besiegers, his cavalry screen, opened a line of communications and channel of supply with the city, but were unable to halt the steady stream of Christian reinforcements arriving by sea at regular intervals. The heavy ships also bore with them timber for the construction of heavy siege engines to batter Acre's walls. More alarming news came to Saladin when he learned that Holy Roman Emperor Frederick Barbarossa had reached Constantinople in August with an army reportedly numbering 200,000 Crusaders. The Ayyubid Sultan sent letters to emirs and caliphs throughout the length and breadth of the Muslim lands, begging for more troops. To counter this new Christian threat, to his despair, he failed to garner additional support. Worse, he found the fidelity of some of his vassals wavering. Several emirs left the Muslim camp to prepare to defend their own homelands against Barbarossa. With their numbers and confidence bolstered, the Crusaders under Guy opted to attack Saladin's lines on the morning of Wednesday, October 4th, with the intent of reaching and destroying the Muslim camp at Tel al-Idea. The attacking force was arranged in 3 lines, of the left, right, and center, with archers and crossbowmen in the first line, infantry in the second, and cavalry in the third. Conrad of Montferrat led the left wing of mostly Italians along the coastline, with Gerardo of Ravenna. The right wing extended to the Belis River and was led by Guy. The cavalry on the right wing consisted of Knights Hospitaller with Italian and French, foot and missile troops. The center was near the mosque of Einbakar, outside the city walls, and was commanded by Andrew of Brienne and Ludwig III, sitting in the rear guard with their knights. Templar Grand Master Gerard of Rydfort led. The center's vanguard, Catalan and German foot soldiers, stood in front of the Templars, remaining in camp as a check against sorties. From the Acre garrison was Guy's brother, Geoffrey of Lusignan, accompanied by James of Louvains and his men. Opposing the Crusaders were the divisions of Saladin's army. On their extreme right wing was the Sultan's nephew, Taqi al-Din. He and his men took position on the end of the line by the sea. On the near right were Saladin's sons Al-Athol and Al-Zahir. The rest of the right consisted of soldiers from Mosul, led by the Lord of Hizn Kaifa. The Muslim left wing was more diverse. On the far left near the Belis River was a company from Asadiyah and the Mamluks of Asad, al-Din Shirkuh, Saladin's deceased uncle. The near left had soldiers from Sinjar, led by Mujahid al-Din Yarankush, more Mamluks, and soldiers commanded by Muzaffar al-Din. There were other groups of Kurds. Amir Mujali led the Mirani and Hakkari Kurds, while others were commanded by their chiefs. Saladin rode in the center, accompanied by his regular troops and a personal guard of military slaves. Each wing was protected by a thin line of skirmishers. The battle began at 9 a.m. when the Crusaders engaged the Muslim advance guard, quickly dispersing it, the Templars and Hospitallers, riding through the enemy infantry and missile ranks. Fighting bogged down for 4 hours. In the afternoon, matters shifted when the Italians on the Crusader left wing managed to push forward into the Muslim right, and Taqi al-Din ordered his soldiers to pull back, attempting a feint to lure the Crusader wing away from the main army. Saladin saw his nephew retire and assumed the worst, sending reinforcements from his own center to assist him. This was a critical error. Upon seeing the thinning ranks ahead of them, the Crusaders in the center and right moved ahead toward Saladin's position, hitting the Muslim line, tents and killed there. At this critical moment in the battle, however, the Crusaders who broke into the Muslim camp chose to loot the tents for booty, driven by both greed and hunger. The looting brought a halt to the Crusader charge, and all momentum in the battle was lost. Saladin, meanwhile, accompanied by only a few personal retainers, was busy trying to save his army, urging the Mamluks and Kurds on the left wing to turn and join in the fight and trying to rally the fleeing remnants of the center ranks. It was then that the Crusaders, busy feasting and looting the enemy camp, spotted the Acre garrison finally joining the fight from the city walls. All day, the battle had favored the Crusaders, but their left wing was now fully sandwiched between the Acre garrison and Taqi al-Din's men. Saladin seized the opportunity, sending his men forward into disorganized enemy ranks. His left wing engaged, as did the rallied remnants of the center. The looters were caught in the tents, while Those fleeing were caught from behind. As Saladin's left wing rolled up the center, the remaining Crusaders broke and were hurtled back towards Acre with Muslim riders close behind. Making matters worse, the Crusader left wing eventually succumbed to pressure and retired to camp, allowing the Muslim right wing under Taqi al-Din to turn and hit their flank in a pincer movement. It was a massacre. The battle had turned, and the remaining Crusaders fled back towards Acre in a chaotic mass, their enemies in close pursuit. Saladin's men soon reached the outskirts of the Crusader camp, nearly pushing on to its tents. But instead, the Muslims withdrew and eventually retired from the field after Geoffrey of Lusignan's reserve force arrived to bolster the shaken Crusader ranks. Casualties in the October Battle of the Siege of Acre vary depending on the source. However, it can be estimated that around 7,000 Muslim and 10,000 Crusader troops perished. In the gruesome clash of October 4th, 1189, after their defeat, the Crusader leadership ordered the troops to dig in for a prolonged siege, as there was little chance of quickly breaking through either Saladin's lines or Acre's walls. The Crusader camp had received some breathing room for expansion after Saladin's army began rearranging itself behind them. Further sea reinforcements arrived at the end of October, including numerous barons and 400 Danish warriors accompanied by the nephew of King Canute VI. Crusaders now dug protective ditches on both sides of their tents. They filled these with sharpened stakes and metal running the length of the camp from the bay to the Mediterranean. These trenches were fronted by earthen ramparts and wooden palisades. Then came the rain squalls and heavy mists, heralding the coming of winter weather. As the year 1189 came to a close, nature brought relief to the Muslims. The brusque winter, although not snowy, brought with it wind strong enough to blow away tents atop the Torrent. Worse, Christian ships could not remain anchored due to the rough conditions. Most of the fleet thus left at the end of October or became fuel for campfires. But the situation in the city was becoming desperate. Cut off from supplies in the winter weather, the starved and desperate garrison of Acre opened negotiations with the Crusaders. The terms were simple. They would capitulate in exchange for their lives. This, however, was foolishly declined by the glory-seeking Crusaders, and, fortunately for the garrison Ayyubid, reinforcements were en route from the sea. The daring Armenian Muslim Admiral Hassam ad-Din Lulu saw a chance to whisk men and supplies into Acre without worrying about the heavy Crusader blockade. On December 17, 1189, he led 50 Egyptian galleys into the harbor using Greek fire to brush aside the few Crusader ships that engaged them. Acre's garrison cheered at the sight of the arriving fleet. The stalemate ended on Easter Sunday, March 25th, 1190, when a new Crusader fleet of 50 vessels from Tyre led by Conrad of Montferrat appeared off the Mediterranean coast, tacking south towards Acre. Guy of Lusignan and Conrad had reconciled their differences, and Conrad was on his way to support Guy's siege camp. Before navigating past Acre's port, Conrad's fleet was intercepted by Muslim ships. The naval battle lasted for better part of the day as Greek fire and volleys of arrows and bolts were exchanged, but the Christians managed to drive off the Muslim fleet and deliver the badly needed supplies and reinforcements to Guy's camp. Fresh Crusader troops continued to pour in throughout March and April, allowing Guy to stage surprise attacks that broke Saladin's supply lines and isolated Acre. The rainy days of spring soon turned into the warm months of summer, and the soggy ground dried out. The Crusaders constructed siege towers with wood brought by Italian merchant ships. For stories high and capable of holding up to 500 men, these movable towers loomed as high as the walls of Acre. They were covered with hides soaked in vinegar and urine, which the Crusaders believed provided protection from the defenders' Greek fire. The towers were ready by the end of April. The sight of the colossal contraption struck fear into the Acre garrison, who entered into a second negotiation with the Crusaders. Once again, though, the Crusaders refused, believing their siege engines would win them.